Good morning, everyone. I hope all of you are doing well. Jules and I are pretty tickled to be here with all of you this morning. Right now, we're going to go ahead and introduce our guest. And so I'm going to introduce our first two, and Jules will introduce our last guest. And so with that, I'll go ahead and start. And one of my favorite people here on the campus is Dr. Ted Olson. Dr. Olson holds a PhD in English from the University of Mississippi, an MA in English from the University of Kentucky, and a BA in English from the University of Minnesota. He is presently a tenured full professor in the Department of Appalachian Studies here at East Tennessee State University. In 2008, he served as a Fulbright scholar, senior scholar in American Studies in Barcelona, Spain. Dr. Olson is the author of many essays, articles, encyclopedia entries, poems, reviews, published in a range of books and periodicals. From 99 to 2004, he was director of ETSU's Appalachian, Scottish, and Irish Studies program. And from 2002 to 2003, he served as the interim director of ETSU Center for Appalachian Studies and Services. From 2003 to 2005, he was president of Tennessee Folklore Society, and from 2009 to 2013, he served as editor of the Journal of Appalachian Studies. Dr. Olson has produced and curated many documentary albums of Appalachian music, several which have played central roles in community-based cultural tourism initiatives. So, Dr. Olson, thank you for being here today. Our next guest is Ryan Bernard, who's an education and outreach archivist. He holds a master's degree in Appalachian Studies from East Tennessee State University. As a graduate student, Ryan played in the old time band in the ETSU Bluegrass Old Time and Country Music program. He has played in several string bands in the region, most recently the Sulphur Springs String Dippers. His research focus during his time at ETSU was the early commercial recordings of traditional Southern Appalachian music in the 1920s and the 1930s. In 2010, he finished his second master's degree in library and information science from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville and worked at King University until July of 2019 as the outreach librarian and program coordinator / associate professor for Appalachian Studies. In 2013, Ryan was part of a curatorial content team that designed the Birthplace of Country Music Museum in Bristol, Virginia. He taught fiddle, banjo, and old-time string band in the Washington County, Virginia Jam program for 4 years and performs with his wife, Amy, as the old-time duo, the Bluebirds. Ryan returned to ETSU to work in the Archives of Appalachia in 2019. He currently serves on the Chuckey Depot Advisory Board and co-chairs the Washington County Archives, Museums, and Historic Sites Coalition. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Carter. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. William H. Turner. He is the fifth of 10 children. He was born in 1946 in the coal town of Lynch, Kentucky in Harlan County, not too far from here. His grandfather's father, 4 uncles, and older brother were coal miners. Bill has spent his professional career studying and working on behalf of marginalized communities, helping them create opportunities in the larger world while not abandoning the important cultural ties. He's best known for his groundbreaking research on African American communities in Appalachia, but Bill's work is universal. As an academic and a consultant, he has studied economic systems and social structures in the urban South and burgeoning Latino communities in the Southwest. What he strives for on behalf of his clients and their communities is what we all want: prosperity, understanding, and respect. Today, Bill and his wife, Vivian, the retired president of the R.J. Reynolds Foundation in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, live near their children and grandchildren in Houston. Welcome. So before we get started, Dr. Carter and I would like to lay out just a few simple ground rules for how the event's going to take place. We would love for you to participate in the chat bar. You can use that to pose any questions that you'd like to ask. There's going to be a time at the end of this event where your questions can be asked of our panelists. But we want to remind you that we're all human, and let's keep, all of the comments respectful and gentle with each other.
Thank you.
As we move
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
And then as we move forward, Dr. Carter and I are going to be asking our panelists each questions. Each one will have an opportunity to respond. And then it's after that point that Sky will be moderating the chat bar in order to look for your questions that we can ask later. And if you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat bar and use that. And if you'd like to connect or be contacted by us, you can leave your email address if you like. And now let's begin.
Thank you. And with the first question, I just want to throw it out there for all three of you. It is, in the research you've done, respectfully, what artists of color have been included as well as excluded from the regional musical narrative? Where should people go or search to learn more about them?
Well, let's see here. I'll start, I guess. Dr. Turner and I have been engaged with producing a podcast for Great Smoky Mountains Association called Sepia Tones, Exploring Black Appalachian Music. It's available on any podcast platform. We have maybe 6 episodes launched already onto that. Onto podcasts to them. They can discussion the ideas. They can hear from musicians themselves talk about their lives and their heroes' lives. So some specific musicians that have been overlooked, shall we say, in the Appalachian music canon, we discuss them in our podcast. And I would just name a few just so that we can get the ball rolling. Certainly a personal friend to Dr. Turner and a personal friend to me is one such candidate for having been somewhat overlooked, the great African-American folklorist and singer. He's a very talented individual, Sparky Rucker, one of the great performers in contemporary Appalachian music, has been somewhat, I think, overlooked, at least in some circles. He was very involved with reviving Black string band music before, in the 1990s, frankly, and earlier, before the Carolina Chocolate Drops emerged and got a lot of public attention for celebrating Black string band music. But Sparky was doing that sort of thing much earlier. Not to take anything away from the Carolina Chocolate Drops and their great achievement, we've actually, in fact, interviewed Dom Flemons for Sepia Tones. I'd like to mention a couple other great musicians who have been somewhat overlooked over the years. The great Howard Armstrong is somebody that I hope we'll talk about at some length today. A string band musician from East Tennessee who recorded at the Knoxville sessions there at the St. James Hotel in 1930 there in Knoxville. A true trendsetter in terms of introducing a variety of styles and sounds and tunes and songs to the repertoire over the years. But he was much more. He was a raconteur. He was a visual artist. He was a great storyteller. So I'd like to just mention Sparky Rucker and Howard Armstrong as two such candidates for people we ought to pay a lot more attention to and who deserve a lot more, shall we say, listening space in our minds and in our hearts. So.
Well, I've got two, maybe from the early part of the 20th century that come to mind. One of those is Jim Booker. He was a Kentucky fiddler that recorded for Gennett Records in the early part of the century. And during that time, they would bring out, he would record, and then they would bring out an all white string band for like promotional materials. Jim Booker, and then in Georgia there was an African American fiddler named Andrew Baxter and the Baxter Brothers. They recorded out of Atlanta. They were kind of overlooked. They were also had some Cherokee affiliation too, and of course Leslie Riddle, that traveled with A.P. Carter, getting a lot of notoriety, more so these days, that he well-deserved notoriety, and he was known for teaching Brownie McGee from Knoxville how to play guitar, and then of course Arnold Schultz, who was influential on Bill Monroe. Those are some that just come off the top of my head that need mentioning for sure.
Well, if I might add to that, I just want to start by acknowledging the unfathomable debt, DEBT, that I owe to Ted Olson, and in general to ETSU itself, which is kind of like the ground zero as the beginning point you might go to know anything about, or most things about what we're talking about in terms of African Americans in Appalachia and music. Just yesterday, I spoke with a woman I know at DePaul University in Chicago. I commend you to a woman named Francesca Royster. Dr. Royster has a new book out called Black Country Music, and published by the University of Texas. And I wrote her, emailed her this morning and asked her to send an inscribed copy to Ted Olson as an early holiday gift. And I told her, please put the following: Dear Ted Olson, Bill Turner says you taught him everything you know about Blacks in Appalachian music. And that's the truth. I've learned so much from Ted, I can't really measure it very well. I have on this T-shirt, I don't know if you can see it good, but it says Black in Appalachia. And there's a young man there in East Tennessee in Whitesburg, I think it's called. His name is William Isom. Y'all might know Will. And he has a range of things he's been doing over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of his podcast. His whole basket is called Black in Appalachia. And about 40 years ago almost, I worked with a musician, a poet, a scholar, community activist, Ed Cabell. God rest his soul. Ed and I worked on a book called Black in Appalachia that was published in 1985. And so one of the things I often say is that in that book, we did not have a heading. We didn't have a chapter, a section called Black Music and Appalachia. And that book was referred to in many places as groundbreaking when we did it in 1985. But how could you have anything that you call groundbreaking and it had nothing about music in it? So I apologize for that. We're working right now on a redo, an update of Black in Appalachia. And Ted Olson, though he hasn't been asked formally yet, is going to write, aren't you, Ted? A definitive piece about what we're talking about here this morning. So yeah, I thank you all. The Appalachian African American Center, not too far away from you guys, located in Pennington Gap, Virginia, over in Lee County, where my great-great-grandmother was born in 1862. My grandmother, my father's mother, was born in 1896 in Wise County. So my whole life has been surrounded by what we're talking about. but I think that what we're learning about the role of Blacks in music. Recently, Ted and I had a conversation with Jack Tottle. Did I pronounce it right, Ted? Tottle.
Right.
Part of our conversation with one of your students, Amethyst Kaya. So I think it was, I'll find it here in a minute and I'll type it on here, but there's a great article that Ted wrote looking back at this backstory for this magazine. It's called Smokey's Life. Comes from the Great Smoky Mountains Association. And Ted and I worked on a piece in here that is called Sepia Tones. And it explores everything we try to do, including a little bit of talk. Ted, you can help me with this. The mural there in your library, I think it is, that Tottle was commissioned, I understand. Was it called All in the Family or something like that?
All in the Family, right.
Yeah, and does it not mention some of these same people that Ryan mentioned a moment ago in terms of old, the backstory, so to speak?
Yes, indeed. Some of them are in that mural that Jack helped to put together maybe 20 years ago now, and it's been sitting there by the elevators on the first floor of Sherrod Library all these years. And Ryan, you go past there every day to go to your office. Maybe you should say a word or two. All I can say is that I remember when it went up in 20 years ago, and Jack Tottle and I talked about it, and I just personally thanked him for taking the initiative to celebrate some of these overlooked artists who certainly deserved a lot more attention. And it's a happy situation that 20 years ago, some of those artists have been much more recognized, such as Leslie Riddle and others. Ryan.
Sure. Yeah, I walked past it this morning. It's a really evocative piece. I think it's important that you guys mentioned that, because that there actually there's some talk and some folks have been meeting to explore a more interactive way to engage that painting. And so maybe a little kiosk or an iPad or something where you can pull up information about each individual artist on that portrait. So yeah, there's Arnold Schultz is on there, of course, Leslie Riddle, several other folks to speak of. But yeah, it's a neat painting for sure.
Thanks, Ryan. Now, I've been informed that some of you all have some presentations you wanted to show us, and I'm sure some of the questions that we ask might be answered inside of your presentations. So, Dr. Turner, I understand you have one. Do you as well, Ted and Ryan?
I don't have a presentation. I just have some content I'd love to share with people.
Wonderful. Well, let's move there now, shall we? And then, if the other questions that the moderators and I haven't been answered, we'll ask then. But I'm sure the content that you have provided is going to be so interesting to our audience.
Sure. I've just got a couple of photographs that I find could be jumping off points. So not full presentation, but something to maybe chew on, so to speak.
Great. So let's start with Dr. Turner. I think you've got a PowerPoint.
Yeah, I do want to certainly go through some things I put together, but as Ryan just said, a couple things to chew on, and maybe I can I'll pull them up in a minute here. But the main thing was to just paint a broad picture that says essentially when we talk about the contributions of Blacks to Appalachian music, there's so many people who are misinformed, I think, and maybe not even informed at all, and who still operate on this idea that there are no Black people in Appalachia. You know, for half of my life, I've been trying to say, no, that's not really true. Particularly in East Tennessee, in the footprint of the indigenous Cherokee people, you can find Blacks' presence going back to the mid 1500s. I mean, literally before the 1619 marker we always use, there were Africans who had come as part of the Spanish explorers into the area of Bryson City, North Carolina, and as close as Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg. You find that most well-thinking people believe that Africans and people of African descent, had their first visible role when they were working in the fields of planters in the deep South, and that's really not the case. Theta Purdue is a name that I commend to people, Perdue, almost like Purdue chicken, but Theta was a PhD trained at Tennessee, who wrote her books out of Duke. And she wrote several books, one called Red and Black in Southern Appalachia, where she goes back to the 1500s. So, you know, if you can find African people of African descent who preceded the landing in Eastern Virginia in 1619, who were in the mountains of the Smokies in 100 years before then. So I just want to first commend people to read about that point in Theta's work, so that you can imagine that Black people had been at the instrumental part of music forever, so to speak, in Appalachia. So there's probably more that we don't know, in fact, than what we do know. Alex Haley, whom I had the pleasure of working with for a while, wrote about that a lot in his groundbreaking, smashing book called Roots, 1976, when Alex wrote Roots. So we really have a lot to show, and I'm no longer even listening to people who start out their work by saying they're going to make visible the invisible Blacks of Appalachia. There's just too many people who are going around saying that just because they didn't know about certain things about Blacks' history in the mountains of the South, as though that history did not exist. So don't listen to anybody who tells you they're going to prove that Black people exist in the mountains of the South. That's a waste of your time. And I'll find my slides here in a second, but Ryan and Ted, you guys go right ahead there. I have my slides, but I don't want to interrupt us in that way. It's just some things I can pull up real quickly, but they were mainly to make the point that you can go back to the 1500s and find Blacks in Appalachia during slavery, the minstrels all through that period, the banjo. I'm sure it was, am I right, Ted, at Appalachian State 25 years ago, they were doing the Black Banjo Festival, as I recall. So we're right on that. Go right ahead, Ted.
Well, sure. And I remember when the Black Banjo Gathering was held, it was actually less than 20 years ago, and C.C. Conway, I think, was behind the organizing of that. C.C. was the one who wrote the terrific book, African Echoes in Appalachian Banjo, which is a seminal work of discussing the African roots of Appalachian music. And so she organized this gathering at Appy State, and that's where the members of the Carolina Chocolate Drops gathered together, but not to reduce the impact of that event to simply the formation of that very important band, because others gathered there who did amazing things with the knowledge that was brought together in that common space there at Appalachian State. It's really important to have gatherings such as this present one, where we're talking together online, because this is where ideas come together and collaborations are formed, and new ideas and realities that have been ignored by others get revealed, or at least brought to bear, and good things happen. I mean, it was a Zoom meeting with Bill and with me that led to the creation of the Sepia Tones podcast. I mean, we basically were involved with discussing as kind of, I guess, invited experts on a whole nother matter, where we started to talk about doing something together to celebrate Appalachian music among Blacks. And that was in the height of the pandemic. And so people weren't meeting, but we were meeting virtually. And so collaborations such as this one lead to very good things indeed. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Well,
Thanks, Dr. Olson. And Ryan, why don't you jump in and maybe
Sure.
share some of those pictures you were talking about?
Sure. So I pulled up an article yesterday, just kind of doing a little background work. I used to work with a gentleman at Middle Tennessee State, and his name is Paul Wells, and he was always trying to get me to listen to old time music. And back then I listened to bluegrass, but I've since learned. I'm an old time musician myself now, but he had a great article called "Fiddling as an Avenue of Black and White Musical Interchange," and it's a great article. And one of the things that I teach in my Appalachian Studies courses, and I've taught an Appalachian music course over the years, I'm like, there's no American popular music without African Americans, period. That's how I start that whole conversation, period. There's no blues, there's no jazz, there's no country western music, there's no old time music, there's no bluegrass without that. So that's how I usually start. And so that usually gets the ball rolling. But one of the things that really, I found a photograph in the last couple of days that I felt was pretty thought provoking. And if I can share my screen here, I'm going to share this photograph. Right. Can you guys see this photograph right here? Yeah. Yay. Okay. So as Dr. Turner was saying, there was this whole way back in scholarship with anything that had to do with Appalachia. There was like this kind of this academic segregation, if you want to call it that. And it's really frustrating because, as you can see from this photograph, and this is probably right around before or during the Civil War era, there was exchange, cultural exchange. It's just insane for me to think that that our two cultures did not mesh. And this is evidentiary. As an archivist, I've got to prove things. And so I love this photograph because this African American is playing the fiddle, which is a European instrument, and the Anglo-Saxon here is playing the banjo, which is an African instrument. So now it could have been staged or whatever, but to me that is a very telling photograph. That explains this interchange, these fiddle tunes, different fiddle styles, the banjo, which just lit up the mountains. Another photograph, and I'll stop sharing this one. And this is a painting that I came across, and I'll share that. See if it comes in here. So this is a photograph from William Sidney Mount, and he was a white painter from the 1700s, but his subject matter here is playing the fiddle again in the 1700s. Again, another European instrument. I just love this because it's again evidence that that African Americans were playing European instruments, and I think it's really telling in the evidence, so to speak. And last but not least, there's one more, and I will keep. So hopefully this will show up. And this is what we call in old time music a mountain banjo. Now, this is an African instrument, obviously, and inspiration, but this is what it looked like in Western Carolina. This is patterned after a pattern that Frank Prophet, an old-time musician in Beech Mountain, North Carolina, he built these mountain banjos. So, early on in the colonial era, there was definitely interchange and exchange. Later on, we had this terrible institution called minstrel shows, and it brought the banjo and the fiddle to the forefront of the national view. That the fiddle, the interplay between the fiddle and the banjo, which is a perfect union, it's been talked about as being a magical union. But the fiddle and the banjo was brought out. These tunes were brought out. Dance was brought out. The bones were brought out. Tambourine was brought out, and the idea of these entertainment value in song. So, like I said before, going back, there's no American popular music without these instruments. But I find this photograph interesting because whites had assimilated the banjo by this point. So the fiddle, on the other hand, with the African Americans, and the whites assimilating this other culture's instrument into their culture. I just find it fascinating. And there's, like Dr. Turner said, there had to be interchange and exchange. So I just find these two photographs interesting. And I'll leave it at that. We can chew on that for a while.
Okay, thank you. But let's get into another question here. How could we, as a field, do a better job of incorporating these diverse musical stories into our museums and programs and programming for both locals as well as tourists? And how will the bottom line in terms of tourism dollars be affected by such inclusion?
Okay, well, great question. Some progress has been made in recent years in terms of being more inclusive in, shall we say, academically inclined celebration of Appalachian and American music. I'm thinking, for example, of the International Bluegrass Music Association, which has become much more cognizant. I mean, from an organizational perspective, I think many of the individual members were well aware of the African roots of Appalachian music and well aware of Black artists and there's seminal role in creating the genre of bluegrass, for example, or country music is another example. But the organizations themselves have been much more inclusive in recent years. Certainly the IBMA has initiated a fund called the Arnold Schultz Fund. I'm paraphrasing the exact title, but to encourage the bringing of Black artists to the annual convention and to generally kind of supporting a more inclusive narrative throughout the work of the IBMA organization. The Grand Ole Opry is a different entity, of course, representing the institution, the commercial enterprise of country music, but they too have become much more inclusive. Going back about 20 years now, maybe 25, the Country Music Foundation and the Country Music Hall of Fame put out a very important album called From Where I Stand. And it was a landmark album of acknowledging and celebrating African Americans in country music. It was a multiple LP set, was also put out on CD. And it really did some amazing work towards generating a conversation that's only increased in the 21st century. So those are two major institutions that have only expanded their audience by being honest about the inclusion narrative necessary to tell the full story about those genres, country music and bluegrass. So those are a couple of examples.
Thank you.
I could just chime in on that, Ted. There's a banjo company called Pisgah Banjos, and they make open back banjos, and they are acknowledging every year they have a raffle to raise money for the Arnold Schultz Fund. And so they're primarily a white-owned company. They're over in Asheville, but they are acknowledging that the banjo's origins are African, and so and they're trying to raise awareness by doing this raffle every year. And so the funds that when people try to win a banjo, they put a banjo up for raffle, and the extra funds go into the Arnold Schultz fund every year. So it's a really neat way of acknowledging, hey, we're primarily a white banjo company, but we want to give credit to where we got this idea. We basically make our living from an African instrument. So I think it's really neat how they're doing that.
I'd like to add, Daryl, in terms of tourism and where culture and music plays a role in that there's a lot being done that wasn't done before through the Great Smoky Mountains Association. And you guys are literally in that footprint. As you may or may not know, currently, and for the last 4 years, the superintendent of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is an African American, a man named Cassius Cash. I love that name, Cassius Cash. But recently, Ted and I, when was it, Ted? May 15th weekend, as I shall not soon forget. Ted and I had the almost dreamlike weekend in the Smoky Mountains. Was it Purchase Knob, Ted, it was called, where we were out there? And it was hosted not just black rather, but musicians from around the region were brought together to talk about the natural environment of the Smoky Mountains and music. And Ted, I'd like for you to chime in on this better than I can. And we were hosted by the world famous cellist Yo-Yo Ma, who just absolutely fell in love with the region. So also the Great Smoky Mountains Association, on whose board I serve, has done a great job supporting a program, an educational program that literally is called The Footprints of Black People in the Smoky Mountains. And it's just comprehensive. If you email me, I can send you some material on that. And lastly, I'd like to say that right there next door to y'all, and I see somebody on here is in Jonesboro, the International Storytelling Center. Kiran, Lord, y'all know Kiran, I'm sure. They have a program called Black Storytelling, Freedom Stories, I think it's called, rather. And so there's East Tennessee. You guys are in a position, and rightly so, to do some things regarding the subject we're discussing, to the extent that you've kind of staked out old time music as a focus of study that students can study. I think also too, Daryl, what you guys can do and are doing in terms of just Blacks' presence in East Tennessee. I don't care who hears it, but the so-called flagship institution in Tennessee that does not have a great presence in Appalachia itself. East Tennessee State has a great reputation in terms of Appalachia studies, and I salute y'all, and I hope nobody calls me from Knoxville, but I told them that to their face recently when I spoke at UT. So congratulations. Thank you so much at ETSU for what you guys are doing. And there's a lot more that I'm sure Ryan and Ted and you guys and Daryl and all y'all can be doing. And I think you should be very proud of yourselves for the work you're doing. And this music thing is just the tip of the mountaintop, so to speak. Ted, would you say a little bit more about what you saw and heard with Yo-Yo Ma?
Sure. Yes, it was a gathering at Purchase Knob, and that's in kind of a scientific research education center donated to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park some years ago. And it's a fabulous place to study and to gather. And so Yo-Yo Ma brought together a group, excuse me, a group of scholars and artists and community members to talk about ways to honor and celebrate the true story of the Great Smoky Mountains. And it was quite revelatory, and Yo-Yo played, and there were other musicians there, such as Brian Sutton, and let's see, Edgar Meyer was there, Justin Robinson was there from the Carolina Chocolate Drops. Trey Wellington was there, the great phenom on the banjo. It was a terrific time of conversation, exploration. It was a fact-finding mission for Yo-Yo Ma. I don't think he had an agenda. It was simply about bringing people together and seeing if there could be some sort of catalyst brought about by this gathering toward projects that will help deepen our awareness of the African American and the Cherokee experience in Appalachia. And it was truly magical, and we don't even know where it will take us. I mean, it was one of these situations that was not necessarily leading to a specific point, but it was about exploration and discovery.
Yeah, you know, and last month, that same team that was with Yo-Yo in East Tennessee, in Waynesville, North Carolina, I think that's where we gathered. They later, in early November, about 40 such people came together up in West Virginia at the famous gorge up there, Lord, what's it called? I'll think of it here in a second. But it's near where where people bungee jump off of that bridge up there, just north of Beckley, somewhere like that. Yo-Yo wrote me a nice letter about his experience and the role of the music, and it was just a wonderful weekend.
Certainly exploring and going on discoveries like that without any point, as you said, Dr. Olson, but this idea of exploring is where so much learning happens. Going in with the idea that you don't know what you don't know yet, so let's explore it. That sounds so rewarding and so fascinating. Did you have any more that you wanted to share about that experience of getting together with a group of people to just explore what you might discover together?
I've got an interesting anecdote which I'd love to share. One of the things I do, I guess, as a music researcher is to put together documentary albums of music that's been overlooked in recorded form. And so 2 years ago, we did a Bristol Sessions box set with Bear Family Records, did a Johnson City Sessions box set with the same label. Same label then encouraged us to put together a collection of the forgotten recordings, mostly forgotten recordings made in Knoxville. And so Dr. Turner mentioned Knoxville and how the flagship university of our state has kind of overlooked Appalachia over the years. It is changing happily. University of Tennessee Press is definitely publishing more Appalachian-based books. So I want to acknowledge the press. But in Knoxville, we put together a celebration of these shall we say, reissued recordings from 1929 and 1930 made in Knoxville. These weren't necessarily influential in the same way that the Bristol Sessions recordings were in the rise of commercial music, but they were tremendous recordings of different genres, from what was then called hillbilly music, of course, early country, to blues and gospel and novelty recordings and other genres beyond that. So we put out this box set on Bear Family Records, 4 CDs and a book. Worked with Tony Russell on that project. And there was a huge celebration in Knoxville in 2016 when the box set was released. At the time, the narrative of that box set was that the Knoxville sessions were kind of to borrow the phrase of that era, not with full understanding of its implications in present day discussions, hillbilly music. So it was kind of seen as yet another important recording session of early country music that happened to also experience the recording of something like 17 recordings of Black Appalachian musicians, which was very different from the experience of the Bristol sessions or the Johnson City sessions, which only had a few African-American participants. So in Knoxville, being an urban space, having a Black population present, and having a coordinator of the project, Richard Voynow, who was a jazz musician in Chicago, who loved Black music already, he sought out the Black musicians. And so that was one of the difference makers, was the producer was actually looking for the Black artists in his enterprise of recording commercial sides back then in 29 and 30. And that led to the discovery of Howard Armstrong and Carl Martin and Leola Manning and others who were tremendously talented in that era. And so this year, well, actually, in fact, next year, January of 2023, I'm kind of working towards reissuing the Knoxville sessions in a distilled version, which will much more focus on the Black Appalachian perspective on the Knoxville sessions. So in those 5 years, it's become clear to me as a researcher that the real contribution of the Knoxville sessions were the celebration of Black Appalachian musicians way ahead of their time. And so this new single CD will be coming out from Bear Family Records. It's a distillation of the Knoxville Sessions box set, but it features far more of a narrative focus on the great African-American artists who were part of that original enterprise in the 20s. And at the end of the day, the great records from the Knoxville Sessions, in my opinion, were by the Black artists, such as Carl Martin and Howard Armstrong and Leola Manning. So that CD will be released in January of 2023. And in Knoxville, I'm not sure how it will affect the narrative there in terms of the idea on the street of the importance of the Knoxville sessions. But I only hope that people in Knoxville embrace that important activity that happened in the 20s, where a recording company, Brunswick Vocalion, came to town and really shone a light on the African-American experience before any other record company really had taken had made that effort. And the rest is history, because Howard Armstrong, discovered at the Knoxville Sessions, is truly one of the most impactful artists of the 20th century from Appalachia. And again, it was in Knoxville that he was first recorded.
Ted, I might mention that every September, early September, they have a festival called the Louis Bluey Festival. It's at a state park in East Tennessee. I'm sorry, I can call Sparky Rucker right quick and ask him, but that's laid down pretty good. Do you know the park where it's held?
I'm trying to think. Is it Lost Cove?
Right. I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to read something to everybody. It comes from the liner notes from a book I just put in the chat room. It's the book I mentioned earlier on called Black Country Music, and I'm having the author send Ted an autographed copy of it. So she'll have it next week to you. The last line in her liner notes, she says, "A Black person who claims country music might still feel a bit like a queer person coming out." And I think that really says it all, in the sense that she goes back in this book, Francesca Royster does, to point out something, Ted, that I know you've heard me say 100 times. My favorite story is how when Charlie Pride walked off the stage the first time he sang or sung, was it, at the Grand Ole Opry, a person walked up to Charlie Pride, Carl, and said, "You know, Charlie, you look like them, buddy, but you sound like us." And Charlie Pride just smiled and walked away and became one of the biggest stars ever in country music. So that this book, Black Country Music, also you might learn, as I did, that long before Darius Rucker, she mentions this a piece, an album where Ray Charles went country, and everybody said, "My God, what is Ray Charles doing?" But he made some very good music on that piece. And of all persons, I would like to sing you a version of "Rolling on the River" by Tina Turner, but I wouldn't dare try to sing. But Tina had her first solo album after she broke up with Ike Turner was called Tina Turner Turns the Country Blue. I'm sorry, Tina Turner Turns the Country On, as in she turns on her grasp of country music. So you can find an album, and nowadays I'm dating myself when I say you can find an album. Excuse me, I'm sorry to you young folks, Jules, but there's a way on Spotify and Apple Music or wherever you get your so-called music, where you can just Google Tina Turner turns the country on, and hear Tina Turner when she's not doing, anything but country music. And I commend you to that piece.
Well, back in '62, I guess it was, when Ray Charles with Atlantic Records told Ahmet Ertegun, the owner, that he was going to do a country album, and he was strongly advised against it.
Mm-hmm.
The thought was he would ruin his career. I mean, he literally was almost, he wasn't forbidden from doing it, but he was cautioned strongly against releasing that. It's probably the best known album of Ray Charles's stellar career, in terms of the one that I think, if people talk about the one where he really changed the face of American music in a single effort. I mean, and that's saying a lot for Ray Charles, who broke barriers all along with singing sacred songs with gospel melodies in the 50s and whatnot. But that was not necessarily seen, though, as a country album at the time. It was seen as the great vocalist Ray Charles singing country songs. So there was a bit of a difference. I think it's only later that people have looked back on it as a kind of a watershed country album. But it was it took extraordinary bravery for Ray Charles to do that. But he had a simple explanation to it. He said, "I love these songs. I want to sing them." And he just left it at that.
Yeah. Along those lines, one of Ray's last CDs that includes several country music artists on it is called Genius Loves Company. And he does a lot of nice pieces on there.
Dr. Turner, would you mind showing us a few of your slides now?
Oh, man, I've gone to sleep on that, didn't I? Let's see if I can find them. Can everybody see that? Can you see my slides now? Okay.
Yes, they're up there.
This Oh, okay. I'd like for you to note this one where I say Black people have lived in Central Appalachia forever. So that goes back to an earlier statement I made. And if you can see that, it highlights Central Appalachia in terms of Tennessee, where I have Knoxville, Sevierville, Johnson City, Kingsport, Bristol, Pigeon Forge, La Follette, Gatlinburg, and Clinton, Tennessee. Important places. And on the Virginia side, you notice on the right of the slide, I go from Appalachia alphabetically down to Wise. And those were places where my own roots are. As I mentioned earlier, my great-great-grandmother was born in Southwest Virginia, in Lee County. If you ever drive between Pennington Gap and Big Stone Gap, I think that's Route 58, as I recall. So that's a slide I wanted to, and I think this one, which says a little about what I've always tried to study, is those 9 questions. Who are the Black people in the mountains? How they get there? Where they come from? And I want to just skip right along, as everybody knows, and just wanted in terms of students who might be looking, that's the region that the ARC, the Appalachian Regional Committee, calls Appalachia. And we can't forget that now we have everything has a little politics to it. And there's this new senator in Ohio who wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy in 2016. I think we'll be hearing more on that banjo in the next few years. But I want to come down to, if I can find it, this slide, that Black people were present in the populations of the indigenous people, the Eastern Band of the Cherokees, going back to the 1500s, and that it was written up mainly by Theda Perdue, Dr. Theda Perdue. There are 2 of her best books, African Americans in Southern Appalachia. So the idea is Black people have been in this region for a long, long time. And one of her first books was called Slavery and the Evolution of Cherokee Society, 1540 to 1866. And another book called Racial Construction in the Early South. Most Black people, like my own great-grandparents, didn't really come into the Appalachian region until the advent of the discovery of mass amounts of coal in West Virginia and Eastern Kentucky and Southwest Virginia. My great-grandparents have been either enslaved or sharecroppers as late as the 1890s. And that's how they got into Southern Appalachia. They came in from basically Alabama and Mississippi into the region where you guys are sitting in East Tennessee. So those are just a few of the slides that I pulled up for this presentation, even to plug a little bit of this book I wrote called The Harlan Renaissance, Harlan. That's the title of a book I've done recently. But many of us are familiar with the Renaissance that was called in our literature in the 1920s in New York City, that part of northern Manhattan called Harlem. But at the same time, as I've tried to point out, there was this place called Harlan, Kentucky. And I had a larger name for it somewhere here. I'll run it. Here it is right here. That's a part of, that's what I call Harlan, the Harlan Renaissance right there, where Tennessee, the bottom half of that would be down around the Cumberland Gap, just west of you guys. But where Tennessee and Kentucky come together, and Virginia, in the red parts of Virginia and Kentucky, that's a place I call West Kentucky. And that's about as Appalachian as you can get. And once again, is my map of these Black spaces. One of the most famous songs ever made by a Chattanooga person called the Empress of the Blues is Bessie Smith. And a lot of young people nowadays really love a woman here in Houston called Lizzo. I know everybody's familiar with Lizzo. But Bessie Smith did things that make Lizzo look like a Girl Scout. And Bessie Smith had a song in the 1930s called Black Mountain Blues. And I commend you to Google sometime a place called Black Mountain in Harlan County, Kentucky. Bessie Smith brought her blues to Harlan County after she made that song called Black Mountain Blues. And my grandmother, who lived to be 103 years old in Harlan County, got to see Bessie Smith. Other musicians, in Western North Carolina, was the home of a famous musician whose name was Nina Simone. Nina Simone was from Tyrone, North Carolina. And another great singer out of that era, as y'all know, was Roberta Flack, Killing Me Softly with his song. And the most famous voice that came out of Appalachia with the guitar from Slab Fork, West Virginia, Bill Withers, Lean on Me. Bill Withers' daddy was a coal miner in Slab Fork, which is a coal mining suburb of Beckley, West Virginia. So we have a very rich history of Black love, Black agency, Black legacy, Black kinship, and Black compassion that came out of Central Appalachia. And the values of these people, I think, that made the songs that Louis Bluey sang was just like the whites of that part of Appalachia. Their dominant values was they were hardworking, their families were first, they were very faithful people who were resilient no matter what J.D. Vance says. Neighborliness, patriotism, sense of humor, sense of humility, honesty, neighborliness, that's what marked the songs. That's what marked the music. And I'd like to commend you to an episode of a show called The United Shades of America by W. Kamau Bell. It aired on CNN back on July 17th of this year. It is available on YouTube, and it's called Blacks in Appalachia. And it's a 45-minute show that Kamau did, and he filmed part of it in my hometown in Harlan County, Kentucky. But he also went to the deepest parts of West Virginia with Crystal Good. And the show ended up with one of the most famous poets coming out of the Appalachian tradition, whom you all hosted, I think it was on September 20th, wasn't it, Daryl? And her name is Nikki Giovanni. Y'all had her there a month or so ago.
That's correct.
And Nikki was on this show. They showed her cooking chitlins and neck bones at the Highlander Center, which I thought was most intriguing. And if you want to pull that show up, it was July 17th, 2022. And I put my email on there. You can call me, email me, and I'll send you a link to it. I think that's all I need to say there. Let's see if I can stop sharing. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jules?
So we have been looking at a lot of the history of Black musicians and influences in the Appalachian region. I'm wondering from all of your research if you can see a trajectory into the future of where all of this is leading, where the future might take us.
Well, I'll tell you, that's an easy one for me. I'm sure to most of you all in your age, it's just a number. But my number is 77 in the next few weeks or months or whatever. And there was a time starting back in 1979. I can't count that good, but it's been, I'll just say 40 years ago, where I would really go back to 1966, if you wanted me to. When I was 20, I met this man, and I hope there are men and women on here today who will do this as this man did for me. And his name was John Stevenson, John Bell Stevenson, B-E-L-L-E. And John John founded something called the Appalachian Studies Association. John was one of the premier persons in that. John passed away in 1994 when he was the president of Berea College. John Stevenson was. I met John when I was 20, and I'll never forget, he said to me, you know something, Billy? He used to call me Billy. And he said, you know something, Billy? You ought to dedicate your life to the study of Black people in Appalachia. He said that to me in 1966. He says, you're the first African American I ever met from Harlan County, Kentucky. God, nobody knows about that. You are, and when he told me I should dedicate my life to that, I kind of said, you got to be kidding. Because I read so many negative things that were negative about whites in Appalachia. You know, Harry Cottle's Night Comes to the Cumberland. I remember that year in '66. I gave John a copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X for Christmas, and he gave me a copy of Night Comes to the Cumberlands. And I want Ryan and all the Ryans of the world, and Tom and Sarah, and those of you who are running into African American students who are from Appalachia, please encourage them to take courses. Just walk up to them like John Stevenson did me, and encourage them to get to know things about their people. Because that's where I see the trajectory going, Jules. In other words, most of us know that in the last 25 years, even yesterday, I saw the release of a book called A is for Appalachia. Somewhere on my desk here, when I saw that Frank Walker has published A is for Appalachia, oh Lord, I don't see it, but 15 years ago, there was a book published for children called A is for Appalachia by some women out of Eastern Kentucky University, one named Pat Banks. And so over the last 40 years, when I used to ride around in the mountains by myself, trying to learn these things and teach these things and do this research and work on what I might call intervention projects to improve the conditions in Black communities, I just always thought that just to study something is empty if you don't do something. So there in East Tennessee, you have people like Daryl Carter. I'm thinking also of Adam Dixon. Seems like Adam is going to have a movie coming out very soon. I started out by mentioning what Bill Eisman is doing in East Tennessee. So back to the campus, back to ETSU in particular, I encourage you guys to do like John Stevenson did for me when I was a young person. And he is the one who inspired me to take a close look at my own parents, my own grandparents, and stop reading and studying about Black people in Mississippi and Alabama and Los Angeles and Chicago and Milwaukee and all these spaces. So I see the future dependent upon teachers in predominantly white institutions like ETSU who can touch those African American students who don't know yet that Daryl is over there doing what he's doing in African American studies, and they be encouraged to have more personal agency about the rich stories of their people and not be ashamed about it. That's our task. I tell people all the time over the years that I've been trying to do this work, just in the last 10 or 15 years, I've seen interest in Blacks in Appalachia grow like so much kudzu in East Tennessee. Now I know y'all got a lot of kudzu over there. So that's my metaphor. Make it grow, make it grow, make it grow. And I, once again, don't want to be too redundant, but there's a lot that you guys are doing, and I wish you all the best as you continue to do it and institutionalize it even more, particularly your grasp on this matter of music. It's a growth industry. That's my 10 cents.
Thank you. Ryan or Ted, would you like to add to that?
Sure. I can speak to the old time community. I think I can think of one artist in particular that is really coming out right now is a young man, African American man named Jake Blunt, and his last record has incorporated all kinds of styles, hip hop and old time traditional music, ballad singing, and there's a rich, ballad singing for years and years and years was this Anglo thing, like Madison County, North Carolina is a hotbed of ballad singing, but all those ballad collectors back in the 1800s just completely ignored African American ballad singers. So Jake is incorporating some of that, and Blind Boy Paxton is another old time musician right now that is getting a lot of exposure. And as far as the old time community goes, it can be a little nuanced, as far as pecking order goes, but I feel like it's also a welcoming community too. And so I feel like, as a white old time musician, it's my responsibility to welcome many cultures to we have an old time jam every Tuesday here in Johnson City that I and another friend of mine run, organize. We've been going over a year now, and we are more than happy to accommodate and welcome anyone in. And so as far as I can speak to that, and as far as the academy and ETSU, I feel like we're at an advantage here because there are so many, the population is very diverse. And that's one of the things that excites me about working here is that we have all kinds of cultures represented, and it's just an opportunity. So I'll leave it at that and let Ted chime in, but I feel like we have a lot of opportunity here.
Well, one of the things that one encounters in revisiting the early era of commercial roots music, what was labeled at the time hillbilly music, what was also labeled at the time race music, is, the segregationalist attitude of the record companies back then. I mean, this fabulous music that was truly coming from different cultural interactions was being labeled as belonging to one population or the other, and was marketed in such a way so that, for example, the amazing Bessie Smith was not necessarily marketed to white Southerners, but of course, obviously, a lot of white Southerners fell in love with Bessie Smith's incredible voice and vast repertoire and dynamic style. So there was a lot of crossover, but the record industry was working against people embracing one another's cultural expressions. One of the great stories of an effort to kind of take on the record industry happened very subtly and happened at the Knoxville sessions in 1930. Richard Voynach, as I said, he was the jazz player for the Wolverines, a white jazz player who loved Black music, recorded Howard Armstrong and Carl Martin and Roland Armstrong as the Tennessee Chocolate Drops at the St. James Hotel in 1930. It was April. And that record had two sides that are now classics of old-time music, frankly, Knox County Stomp and Vine Street Drag. And Voynach encouraged the label, I think with a little pressure from Bill Brown, who was also an old-time producer of that era who worked for the same company. They put pressure on Vocalion to release those two sides on 78, both into the hillbilly music marketing scheme and into the race marketing scheme. The artists remain the same. They were three African-American artists from East Tennessee. Well, of course, Carl Martin, who's from Big Stone Gap, Virginia, but from Appalachia. Anyway, same songs marketed to different audiences were well received in both populations to some degree, although they were not major sellers. But that illustrates that even back then, people were aware of the discriminatory, effect of this kind of race-based marketing, which I would like to say into the future, I hope we're so far past this attitude that, somebody like Trey Wellington is appreciated in bluegrass circles because of his talent and talent alone. Amethyst Kia, who went onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry and sang Black Myself. What was that, a year ago? It was a revolutionary act on her part. And to their credit, the managers of the Grand Ole Opry not only let it happen, but encouraged it to happen. And the Grand Ole Opry band chimed in with her and said, we want to play behind this song. We want to stand beside you and overlook decades of, frankly, racism in that institution of the Grand Ole Opry. And so I guess what I'd like to say is that I hope that we're past those attitudes and that we're all about sharing our common heritage and our links with one another. And so I guess that's a statement that moving forward into the 21st century, I'm hoping that talent wins out regardless of who people are or where they come from. That we embrace people because of their talent and because they have something important to say. And that I'm all for breaking down genre delineations whenever possible, because we ought to be viewing American music, Appalachian music, as a large umbrella, as a large tent where everybody has a place, and that we should all work together to make this heritage prosper and grow in meaningful ways.
Thank you. I love the hope
May I
that I
add one?
hear. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm hearing my friend Ted's voice straining. I don't know if it's just me, but it brings to mind, it triggered in my head that aside from his reputation as an expert ethnomusicologist, he's also a closet rapper. I want you all to know that. I say that because with Ted, we recently, speaking of the future, while doing sepia tones, and toward the end of it, it hit upon us almost at the same time to say, perhaps the most popular form of music that has ever hit human civilization is rap and hip hop. So Ted and I are now collaborating on a program that we're working on, and it's called Hip Hop on the Mountaintops. And we have gathered together a couple dozen young people who are rappers in places as disparate as Big Stone Gap, Virginia, and Bluefield, West Virginia, and Hazard, Kentucky, and Knoxville. And because just like at some point, 25 years from now, nobody will ever say, gee, I didn't know there were black rappers or there were rappers in the mountains of the South. It illustrates the parallelism of what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half. And that is, as Ryan pointed out so well, you just can't do anything in America, unless there has been this involvement of people of African descent. And I think we've all had the undertone here to say, get over it, everybody, when you find yourself wondering, where did they come from? That's our stuff. Well, there's no stuff that any person can lay claim to as this is white and this is black and this is it's a melting pot. It's people working together, people being influenced by one another, and thank God for it.
Thank you. And at this time, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I want to invite Sky here to ask, to put out a couple questions if we have any from the online chat before we wrap up.
I actually don't have any questions. If y'all want to ask one right now, do so or forever hold your peace. There's an excellent amount of links and book suggestions that were put in the chat, so you might want to scroll through there before we close out and check those out. And I think if we don't have any questions, maybe everyone could say a final word and close out that way.
Okay, that sounds good. Dr. Olson?
Great. And this is to plug an event that's going to happen at ETSU too, Daryl. We're going to have a world premiere discussion about an album that I contributed toward that will be called Birthright, a Black Roots Music Compendium, a 2 CD set which will be released by Craft Recordings in February of 2023 in conjunction with Black History Month. And happily, we were able to situate kind of the launch event and celebration of that CD release, featuring 40 classic recordings from the Concord Music Vaults, with some licensing from other recording companies. Classic recordings of Black Roots music will be on there. Anyway, I just wanted to call people's attention to that. And so the work continues, the effort to understand and grow from these recordings and from the knowledge that we can glean from the recordings, the discussions we can have in response to the recordings, hopefully will continue for many, many years. And great inspiration from these recordings that I've personally had in helping bring this about. So.
Thank you, Dr. Olson. I will tell the group that we are very excited about Ted's event coming up in February, and there will be an event at the Reese Museum for this, and there will be more information coming in January on that. Thank you. Dr. Turner, any last thoughts?
I do want to just underscore my asking you guys to go out of your way, so to speak, to speak to these students of color on your campuses and encourage them to get to know more about their Appalachian roots. And that way we will ensure the perpetuation of this kind of conversation. And for that matter, I think even as you might talk to students who are not African American, but who are from the region, to ask them about their knowledge of people of color in their home regions, and watch them then and see what they say, and ask them to express more about that. So it amounts to a kind of agitation of the conversation at the level that Frederick Douglass said. I leave you with 3 words: agitate, agitate, agitate. Because an educator who agitates keeps students moving forward. And I obviously want to thank you all for the opportunity to join you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Turner. Ryan?
Yeah, I've just been thankful for being a part of this. This is a great conversation. It is an honor to be with these other fine gentlemen and ladies. And thank you for the good questions. Keep up the good work. I'll forever be indebted to Dr. Turner for this great quote: "Don't just study something, do something." I think that's wonderful. And thank you so much.
Well, we'd like to thank you all for being here. Jules, can you share the date of the next event?
Yes, actually, Sky, do you have that information? What we want to do is share with you all, we're going to have another of our Usable Past series is going to start in 2023. And we would love to have all of you all who are here with us today to register for that event as well. And Sky, can you share that information with everyone?
Maybe Anne or Megan could put the date exactly in the chat. I don't know the date, but I know it will be in February, and I will email a link for registration to this group that registered for this event today. So you will get an invitation with more information in the future.
Right.
So just know that it's coming up in February. Sky will email you all with that information, and we hope that you'll join us again. And I just want to thank our three panelists so much. I learned so much today, and I feel so inspired. And I want to agitate and be agitated. So thank you so much for the inspiration. Thanks so much for the information, all the great pictures that you shared with us, the presentation and everything. You all were amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, before I close the meeting, if you're still here, follow us on Facebook. We have a Useable Pass Facebook page, and so you can find all the information there as well. So thank you all. Have a great day. Thanks for being here, and thanks to our guests and moderators.
Thank you all.
Bye.